23 seasons. 23 years of walking into arenas where the loudest sound in the building is his own name being screamed at him by people who hate him. More points than any human being who has ever played professional basketball. Championships in 3 different cities, with 3 different rosters, in 3 different decades of his own life. And right now, in the summer of 2026, LeBron James is standing at the edge of the whole thing, chasing a 24th season without a team. Think about that for a second. The most famous basketball player alive, the all-time leading scorer, and nobody on the planet knows what jersey he is going to be wearing when the ball goes up. And in the middle of all of that noise, somebody went and asked Michael Jordan about him again. Because they always do. They have been doing it for 20 years. And the answer Jordan gave, the way he framed it, the thing he was careful to say, and the thing he was careful not to say, went through the league like a current. Studios stopped, group chats lit up. And a whole generation of players who grew up worshiping both of these men had to sit there and figure out what they had just heard. Here is why this one hits different, and I want you to stay with me for the next half hour, because this is not a highlight reel. This is a story of how one man ended up carrying the heaviest comparison in the history of American sports on his back for 2 full decades, and what happened when the man on the other side of that comparison finally addressed it out loud. Before we go in, do me one small favor. Tap that like button and subscribe, because stories like this one get buried unless people move on them. 2 seconds from you, and it keeps this whole channel breathing. All right, let's get into it. Look, you have to understand what LeBron James actually is in 2026, because the number of people who genuinely grasp it is smaller than you think. We have watched him for so long that we have gone numb to it. He has been famous since he was 16 years old. 16. He was on the cover of a national magazine before he had a driver's license, being called the chosen one, being told by grown adults that he was going to be the next great American athlete before he had ever played a single minute of professional basketball. Most human beings never survive that. Most of them break in the first 3 years. He did not break. That is the first thing. That is the thing nobody says enough. 23 seasons. Let me put that in perspective for you, because it does not land unless you do the math. The average NBA career lasts somewhere around 4.5 years. 4.5. That is the average for a man who was good enough to get drafted, good enough to make a roster, good enough to be one of the 450 best basketball players on the entire planet. 4.5 years, and then it is over and he goes and gets a job somewhere. LeBron has done more than 5 of those careers back to back, without stopping, without a real gap year, without a season lost to a catastrophic injury that erased him. He came into the league in 2003, when the sport looked completely different, when the rules were different, when the shot chart was different, when the training was different, when nobody had ever heard the phrase load management, and he is still here in 2026 chasing a 24th year. And it is not just longevity. That is the part people flatten. Longevity by itself is not that rare. There have been guys who hung around forever as role players, coming off the bench, playing 11 minutes, taking 3 shots, collecting a paycheck for a couple of extra seasons. Nobody builds a debate around that. He did not do that. He stayed at the top. He kept making all-NBA teams into his late 30s. He kept leading teams to the playoffs. He kept being, on any given night, the best player on the floor in a league that got faster and younger and more skilled every single year around him. Every year the athletes coming in got better. Every year the shooting got deeper. Every year the game he learned got a little more obsolete. And every year he adapted to it over and over, until the version of LeBron James playing in 2026 is basically a completely different basketball player from the one who showed up in 2003. That is the piece the numbers cannot tell you. He has been at least 4 different players in one career. He came in as a 19-year-old freight train who got to the rim because nobody his size had ever moved like that. Then he became the best passer of his generation. Then he became a post player. Then he became a jump shooter. Then he became a coach on the floor who reads defenses 2 possessions ahead and moves everybody like pieces on a board. He rebuilt his own game from the studs more than once in public while carrying the expectations of an entire country. And then there is the record, the scoring record. Understand what that actually meant. That number had stood for almost 40 years. It was one of those records that people treated like scenery. It was not something you chased, it was something that existed, like a mountain on the horizon. To pass it, you do not just have to be a great scorer. You have to be a great scorer who never gets hurt, for 2 decades, at a volume nobody sustains. You have to score 25 points a night for 20 years and never take a season off. Every single night he played, from his rookie year to now, he was quietly grinding toward it, and most people did not even notice until he was close. He broke it. And the strangest part is how fast the world moved on. Within about a week, the conversation was already back to the same question it has been on since he was 19 years old. Is he better than Michael Jordan? That is his whole life. That is the thing. And the rings. 3 franchises: Miami, Cleveland, Los Angeles. Understand how unusual that actually is. Most great players win where they land. They get drafted somewhere, the front office builds around them, and if it works there. And their whole identity gets tied to one city and one uniform. LeBron won in 3 completely different situations, with 3 completely different casts, under 3 completely different kinds of pressure, at 3 completely different ages. And the middle one, Cleveland in 2016, is the one that will outlive everything else he has ever done, and we are going to get to why. But here is the thing I need you to sit with before we go any further. Every single one of those achievements, every record, every ring, every impossible season, arrived into a conversation that was already decided before he got there. He never once got to be judged on his own terms. Not one time in 23 years. Every accomplishment got processed through the same filter, immediately, before the confetti was even off the floor. Not, is this great? Not, is this historic? Just, does this get him to Jordan? Imagine doing your job at the highest level anyone has ever done it, for 20 years, and every time you finish something enormous, the only question anybody asks is whether it was enough to catch a man you have never played against. So how did we get here? Why did it become this specific comparison? And why did it become a religion instead of a conversation? Because that is what it is now. It is not sports talk anymore. People do not discuss it, they defend it, the way people defend things they were raised on. Let's go back. To understand the weight on LeBron, you have to understand what Michael Jordan actually was in American culture. And it is very hard to explain to anybody who did not live through the 90s, because there is no modern equivalent. None. Not in any sport. Jordan was not the best basketball player in the world. He was the most famous person in the world. That is a different thing entirely. In the 90s, in countries that did not have basketball, in places that had never seen an NBA game, people knew that face. He was on the shoes. He was in the commercials. He was in the movie. He was the reason the sport went global. Kids in cities that had never had a hoop on the block knew who he was. And he had the resume to hold it up. 6 championships with the Chicago Bulls. 6 trips to the finals, 6 rings, and this is the detail that does the quiet damage in every argument that has ever been had about him. He never lost one. Not a single finals loss on the record. Every other all-time great in the history of the sport has one. That is normal. That is what happens when you play long enough at that level against other great teams. Losing in the finals is what happens to legends. It never happened to him. So when he stepped away, the sport had a problem it did not know how to solve. The standard had been set by a man who left with a perfect record in the only round that anybody remembers. And basketball, unlike almost every other sport, never updated it. Think about that. In most sports, the old great gets respected and then gets passed, and the reference point moves forward, and the new man becomes the measuring stick for the next generation. That is healthy. That is how history is supposed to work. Basketball froze. The standard never moved. Every single player who has walked through the door since 1998 has been measured against a man most of them never saw play live. And then, LeBron showed up. And here is why it landed on him specifically, and not on the 10 other great players who came through in between, because he was announced. That is the difference. Nobody built up any of the others before they arrived. LeBron was declared the next one while he was still in high school, by adults, on national television, in print, everywhere. The comparison was not something he earned into. It was assigned to him. Before he played a professional game, he was already carrying it. So from the very first night, he was not a rookie. He was a verdict waiting to be delivered. And the terms of that verdict were brutal, because they were set by the other side. The whole conversation was built on Jordan's categories. Rings, finals record, clutch shots, killer instinct. Those are the numbers that describe Jordan's career perfectly, because they came from his career. It is like being asked to prove you are the best swimmer in the world in a race that measures how fast you run. And LeBron's greatness was never shaped like that. His case is built on things that do not photograph well: volume, consistency, availability, playmaking, adaptability. Being the best player in the league for a decade and a half straight, making 8 straight finals, which is a run of sustained dominance that almost nobody in the modern era has been anywhere near. But those are cumulative things. They are slow things. They do not fit on a poster. So he spent 20 years playing a game where the rules were written for somebody else, and every year, the same argument in the same shape with the same conclusion waiting at the end of it. And it got ugly. Let's be honest about that too. This was not a friendly debate. There were years, especially the Miami years, where the pushback against LeBron was genuinely nasty. He got called soft, he got called a choker, he got told he did not have the killer instinct, which is a phrase that in this argument does not really mean anything, except that he was not Michael Jordan. Whole media careers got built on being the guy who says LeBron is not him. And the thing is, a lot of that started before he had done anything wrong. It started because people felt like a crown was being handed to somebody who had not paid for it. He heard all of it for 20 years, and he kept showing up. And I want to be fair here, because this cuts both ways. There were stretches where he handled it badly. There were moments where he looked like a man who was tired of being told he was not enough, and it showed in the way he carried himself. He made decisions that turned the whole country against him. He said things he had to walk back. He was 25 years old and being asked to be a finished historical figure, and sometimes he answered like a 25-year-old, because that is what he was. None of that is a defense. It is just the truth of watching a human being grow up with the entire planet grading him in real time. But look at the pattern over 2 decades and something becomes obvious. He never ran from it. He could have. There was an easy exit available to him at any point, and it was right there the whole time. All he ever had to do was say the comparison was stupid, that he was his own player, that he did not care about it. Plenty of great athletes take that door. It costs nothing, and it buys you peace. He never took it. He stayed in the argument. He kept putting himself in situations where he could lose in front of everybody year after year, into his 40s, when he had absolutely nothing left to prove and everything left to lose. That is not the behavior of a man avoiding a standard. That is the behavior of a man walking straight at one. And through the entire thing, the one voice everybody actually wanted was the one voice that was mostly not in the room, because the man on the other side of this comparison had been retired for years, had moved into ownership, and was not out there arguing about it every week. But he did get asked. He got asked constantly, and every so often over the years, Michael Jordan has answered. And that is where this story turns. Because here is what almost nobody thinks about. Everybody in this debate has a stake in it. The analysts have ratings. The former players from the 90s have their own era to protect. The younger players have their own hero to defend. Everybody talking is talking for a reason. There is exactly one person on earth whose opinion in this argument cannot be dismissed, because he is the standard itself. And for most of the last 20 years, he mostly stayed out of it, until he did not. Michael Jordan has been asked about LeBron James for the better part of 2 decades. On television, at events, in documentaries, in sit-down interviews with people he trusts, and in ambush questions from people he does not. And when you line up what he has actually said over the years, in order, something interesting happens. It changes. That is the part almost nobody notices, and it is the most human thing in this entire story. In the early years, when LeBron was young and the comparison was mostly hype, Jordan's answers had a certain distance to them. He was polite about it. He acknowledged the talent, because you would have to be blind not to. But the whole framing kept coming back to the same idea, which is that you do not get compared to somebody until you have done what they did. It was not disrespect. It was a door that had not been opened yet. The message underneath it was consistent for years. Come back when you have the hardware. And you have to understand the context of those years. Jordan was fresh out of the game. Every young player who came in got called the next Jordan. There had been a whole line of them before LeBron even got there, guys who got saddled with that comparison and had it wreck their careers, guys who were very good players who ended up being treated like failures because they were not the next him. So there was a natural resistance to it. He had watched that title get handed out over and over to people who could not carry it. Then the years went by, and the resume kept growing, and something in the tone shifted. By the time LeBron had won in Miami, and then done what he did in Cleveland, and then done it again in Los Angeles with a completely different supporting cast at a completely different age, the framing in Jordan's answers changed. The door that was closed started opening. When he talks about LeBron now, he talks about the longevity. He talks about the consistency, about what it takes to be that good for that long, about the physical reality of playing at that level into your 40s, which is something Jordan himself did not do, and he knows it. And there is a second thing in there, and this one is more interesting than the first. When Jordan has been asked to break the comparison down, he has repeatedly pushed back on the whole premise of it. He has made the point, more than once in different settings, that comparing players across eras is a losing game. Different rules, different defenses, different travel, different training, different everything. He has said versions of that idea for years, and it always gets buried, because it is not the answer anybody wants. People want a name. They want him to say a name. And you have to ask yourself why a man in his position would keep giving an answer that gets him no headlines and satisfies nobody. There are two ways to read it. One is that it is a dodge, that he does not want to say the thing that would end his own argument. That is the cynical read, and plenty of people have taken it. The other read is that he is telling the truth about something he understands better than anybody alive, which is that the thing he did and the thing LeBron did are not actually the same activity. He played in a league with hand-checking, where wing players got physically mauled on every drive, where the pace was slower and the half-court was a knife fight. LeBron played most of his career in a league that outlawed all of that and then rebuilt itself around the three-point line. Both of them were the best player in their environment. But the environments do not overlap. You cannot run the same test twice. And there is a third thing that comes up when Jordan talks about this, and it is the one that has aged the strangest. He has talked over the years about the generational nature of the whole conversation, about how every era needs its own guy, about how the players before him had their own arguments and their own case, and how he had to hear about them when he was young, and how the cycle just repeats. He has made the point that the young generation always thinks the old generation is overrated, and the old generation always thinks the young generation is soft, and both of them are wrong, and both of them will be replaced, which means the greatest competitor in the history of the sport. The man who allegedly could not stand losing anything to anybody has been publicly saying for years that this argument is not really winnable and probably not that important. You can decide for yourself whether he means it. But he has been consistent about it. And consistency, over 20 years, in dozens of separate settings, is usually the closest thing you get to the truth. Now here's what makes the recent stuff land so much harder than the older stuff, and this is the whole reason we are here. The context changed underneath it. When Jordan was giving guarded answers about LeBron in 2009, LeBron was a 24-year-old with no rings and a lot of noise around him. The guarded answer made sense. There was nothing to evaluate yet. It was a prediction, not a judgment. But now the career is basically done. There is nothing left to add. The scoring record is his. The rings are in the bank. The seasons are counted. Whatever else happens, the shape of it is finished. And you can look at the whole thing at once for the first time. And when you ask the man who set the standard about a career that is now complete, you are not asking him to predict anything anymore. You are asking him to render a verdict on a finished body of work. And that is a completely different question. That is why the words land so much heavier now than the exact same words would have landed 15 years ago. Nothing about the sentence changed. Everything about the moment did. And that is what made the league stop and listen. Because here is what happens the second Michael Jordan says anything about LeBron James. It does not stay a quote. It becomes a weather system. Within an hour, it is on every studio show in the country. Within a day, it has been chopped into 40 clips and pushed onto every timeline on Earth, most of them with the context stripped out, most of them titled to mean whatever the person posting it needed it to mean. Half the internet reads it as an endorsement. The other half reads it as a shot. Both sides are absolutely certain they are right, and both sides are working from the same 45 seconds of footage, and the reaction inside the league is a much more interesting thing to watch than the reaction outside of it, because the players do not react the way the public does. The 90s guys, broadly, hold their line, and you have to understand why, because it is not just stubbornness. Those men lived through something specific. They know what that decade felt like from the inside. They know what it was like to walk into a building and feel the whole room change when one man came out of the tunnel. They know that whole franchises spent years building rosters shaped specifically like a wall to stop him, and failed, and had their careers defined by that failure. That is not a stat you can look up. It is a memory, and it is theirs, and no amount of scoring records is going to talk them out of it, and a lot of them have been openly annoyed for years at how the modern conversation treats their era. There is a real generational resentment there. They watch a debate happening about a decade they actually played in, conducted mostly by people who were not born yet, using arguments built entirely out of statistics, and it grates on them. So when the subject comes up, they dig in. Some of them have gotten genuinely heated about it in public. That is not really about LeBron. That is about their own lives being reduced to a talking point. The younger players go the other way, and it is not close. And that is one of the most telling things in this whole story. Because think about who those guys are. There are men in this league right now who were born after Jordan played his last game with Chicago. Their entire experience of Michael Jordan is film, documentaries, and stories told by older people. Their entire experience of LeBron James is real. They watched him growing up. Some of them played against him. Some of them were on the same floor as him last season. A few of them, and this is genuinely strange to say out loud, played with him and were closer in age to his kids than to him. For that generation, this is not really a debate at all. Their standard is the one they watched with their own eyes. And that is not disrespect toward Jordan. That is just how human beings work. You believe what you saw. And then there is the third group, and this is the group that matters most, and it is the quietest one. The guys who actually had to guard him, because those men are not doing media takes, they are describing a job they had to do, and the way they describe it has almost nothing to do with rings or records. They talk about the physical impossibility of it. They talk about a man built like a defensive end who moved like a guard and thought like a coach. They talk about knowing exactly what he was about to do, calling it out loud to their teammates in advance, being in perfect position and watching it happen anyway. They talk about being in the best shape of their lives at 26 years old and getting worn down in the third quarter by a man 10 years older than them. That testimony is different from an opinion, and it is why this argument never dies, because both sides have witnesses, real ones, men who paid for their opinion with their own careers. And the honest answer, if anybody wanted one, is that there probably is not a winner here. There is just a room full of people who saw different things, and all of them are telling the truth about what they saw. But there is a piece of this story that almost nobody tells, and it is not about Jordan, and it is not really about rings. It is about what this whole thing has actually cost the man in the middle of it, because we talk about the GOAT debate like it is a game, like it is a fun argument to have on a Tuesday, like it is a poll on a screen with two faces on it. There is a human being standing inside that poll. There has been for 23 years. Think about what this actually did to his career, practically on the floor. LeBron James has never in his life been allowed to have a normal bad night. Ordinary superstars are allowed to go 3 for 15, shrug and get on the plane. Nobody writes a philosophy about it. When LeBron has a bad game, it is not a bad game. It is evidence. It goes into the file. It gets pulled up in an argument 9 years later by somebody who was not even watching it live. Every playoff series became a referendum. Not on the team, on him. Every finals loss, and he has more of them than Jordan because he went to more of them, became a permanent line on a scoreboard that never resets. That is the cruelest math in this entire thing, by the way, and I want to be really clear about it. Getting to the finals 8 straight times is one of the most absurd achievements in the history of American team sports. 8 consecutive years of being the last team standing in your conference, and in this specific argument, that run gets used against him, because he lost some of them. So the reward for being great enough to get there more often than anybody is a worse record in the category that people care about most. Sit with that. The better he was at getting to the biggest stage, the more chances he created to be called a loser. And it went past basketball, which is the part that gets forgotten. Some of the hostility toward him early in his career had nothing to do with jump shots. He was a young black athlete who took control of his own career at a time when that was not something players were supposed to do. He picked where he wanted to work. He put together a team he wanted to play with. He built businesses. He spoke about things outside of sports and got told to shut up and play. He changed the power structure of the entire league, and a lot of people never forgave him for it, and then dressed that up as a basketball opinion about clutch shots. Every one of those things carried a cost, and he paid it in public every single week for 23 years. And here is the part that almost nobody wants to admit, and it is the real reason for the whole thing. Michael Jordan is not really a player in this argument anymore. He is a myth. And you cannot beat a myth because a myth does not have bad games. Nobody remembers the ordinary Tuesdays. Nobody remembers the years it did not work. The memory has been sanded down to nothing but the last shot, the tongue out, the perfect ending. That is not a person. That is a highlight reel with 30 years of polish on it. LeBron never got that. He has been fully documented, every single night, by more cameras than anybody in the history of the sport. Every possession, from every angle, in high definition, clipped and slowed down and argued about within minutes. There is no mythology available to him. You cannot build a legend out of a man everybody has watched, in full, without a break, since he was in high school. That is not a basketball problem. That is a physics problem. He was born into an era that does not allow anybody to become a legend because it never looks away long enough for the legend to form. And that is what makes the 2016 finals so important, and it is why that series will outlive every other thing in this argument. Down 3-1 against a team that had just won 73 games in a regular season, which is the most anybody has ever won. Nobody in the history of the league had ever come back from 3-1 in the finals. Nobody. And he did it in Cleveland, for a city that had not won a championship in any sport in more than 50 years, a city he was from, a city he had left and come back to. Go back and look at what that actually required. 3 straight elimination games against the best regular season team ever assembled, 2 of them on the road, in a building that had barely lost all year. One mistake in any of those 48 minutes and the whole thing is over, and the story is that he failed again. He did not make the mistake. He played the last 3 games of that series at a level that people who watched it live still talk about like they are describing something they are not sure they saw correctly. That is not a stat line. That is the closest thing his career has to a myth. That is the one moment even the people who argue against him have to go quiet for, and it is worth asking why that one broke through when nothing else did. It is because it had the one thing his career was never allowed to have: a story with a shape, a hole to climb out of, an impossible opponent, a hometown, and an ending. So where does this actually land? What is left when he finally stops? And that is not a hypothetical anymore, which is the strange part about doing this in 2026. He told the Lakers he intends to play somewhere else. He has not signed anywhere. As we sit here, the all-time leading scorer in the history of the NBA, chasing a 24th season, does not have a team. That has never happened. There is no precedent for it, because nobody has ever been here before, and there is something almost perfect about it. His entire career has been about control, about choosing, about being the first player of his kind to decide his own terms instead of waiting for a front office to decide them for him. And here at the very end, the last decision is still his, and the whole league is standing there waiting to find out what it is. Now here is what I actually think the legacy is, and it is not a number. Watch what happens the day he retires. Watch how fast the conversation changes. Because the thing that has protected the argument against him for 23 years is that he was still playing. As long as a man is on the floor, you can point at his bad nights. You can point at the minutes he takes off, the shot he missed last April, the series that got away. Active players get judged on their worst moments. Retired players get judged on their best ones. The day he stops, that stops with him. And the ledger closes, and people will look at the whole thing at once for the first time in their lives. 23 years. 3 franchises. The scoring record, the comeback. 8 straight finals. 2 decades as the best or second best player alive, without a break. And a lot of people who spent years arguing against him are going to look at that closed book and quietly change their answer, because it will be the first time they have ever been allowed to see it whole. That is the thing about a career this long. It cannot be understood while it is happening. It is too big and too slow. You have to stand back from it, and you cannot stand back from something you are standing inside of. And here is the last thought, and then I want to hear from you. The entire NBA bows to LeBron James, and it does not bow because of the record, although the record is his. It does not bow because of the rings, although there are 4 of them in 3 different cities. It bows because he took the single heaviest expectation that has ever been placed on an American athlete, an expectation handed to him before he could legally drive a car, and he carried it for 23 years without ever once putting it down. Not in Cleveland the first time, not in Miami when the entire country was rooting against him, not in Cleveland the second time when he had to deliver a title to a city that had been waiting 52 years, not in Los Angeles in his late 30s, not now, at the very end, without a jersey. Nobody else has done that. Not one person in the history of this sport has been told, at 16 years old, that they were supposed to become the greatest of all time, and then spent the next quarter century actually being in the conversation. And the man on the other side of it, the standard itself, has been asked about him for 20 years, and the way he has answered has slowly shifted from a closed door to something a lot closer to respect. That is not nothing. That is the hardest thing in the world to get out of a competitor like that. So now I want to hear from you, and be honest. Who is your greatest of all time? And more importantly, why? Not the answer you were raised on. The answer you actually believe when you sit down and look at both careers side by side. And the second question, which is the fun one. If you could put prime LeBron James on the same floor as prime Michael Jordan, one game, everything on the line, who is holding the trophy at the end of the night? Drop it in the comments because we read them, and the best ones end up in the next video. If you got this far, you already know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn the bell on, because we are going through this entire era, one legend at a time. Next up, we are getting into what Kobe Bryant said about all of this, and about the one thing he believes separated the two of them, and that one might be the most uncomfortable video in the whole series. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.